Hi, my name is Andrew Fishman. I'm here in StoryCorp's sound booth in Grand Central Station with my mother, Claire Fishman, and I wanted to get a flavor for some of her youth so we can carry this on over the generations of our family.
And the date also.
Today is Wednesday, December 17th, 2003. It's around the holiday time, and as a matter of fact, I believe it's my mother's first time in Grand Central, living in New York her whole life.
Wow.
That's true.
So, please tell me your name, your birth date, and I just mentioned where we are. How about your name and your birth date and where you live?
Well, my name is Claire Fishman, and my birth date is February 17th, 1928. And presently I live in Elmont, New York. And would you like to know where I was born?
Well, tell me, let's start, tell me where you were born. We'll start with that.
I was born in the Doctor's Hospital in Borough Park, Brooklyn, 45th Street and 15th Avenue.
What are the earliest memories of your family that you have?
Oh my goodness. I remember having a bigger brother and a bigger sister because I was the youngest in the family. And it was a very close-knit, loving family. And I was deeply loved, especially because I was a baby in the family. My sister and brother would never have words with me because I was the favorite.
So you were the favorites, and you grew up in tight quarters, I understand, with very little money. And
Yes, it was a time in Grandma and Grandpa's life where they were hit because of the Depression, which of course I would be totally unaware of. And I do remember being told a story that they were one of the few people in their day and age that had a telephone in the house. And that telephone had to be pulled out because Grandma explained to me years later that they couldn't afford to have a telephone. So money had to be extremely tight. But love and caring is the name of the game, and that's what I'm sure got us through, because my mother was a very, very special, loving, caring person, not only to her children, but to her friends as well.
Tell me more of the relationships. I know you had an aunt who grew up in your household as well.
Yes, my mother was the oldest of
What was her
four
name?
children. Her name was Sadie, her maiden name, Sadie Galansky. When she married my dad, Jack Pollock, which of course made my name at the time, my maiden name, Claire Pollock. But when my mother's dad died, she had a younger sister, and things, as I said, were very bad in those days in the United States, all over the world, I guess. And that was Aunt Millie, who was the youngest sister, and when Grandpa died, she was left with her mother, and they didn't have monies, and she was babachana. And she had to go work for someone in their home that were comfortable people, and she was a cook for them and the housekeeper. And Aunt Millie really had no place to go. And so she had to move in with us, and we only had a 2-room apartment, and we were 3 children. I shared a bed with my sister, Stella, and my brother in the same room in a twin-size bed. His name was Bernie. We slept in one bedroom, and we did fine. But then Aunt Millie came to live with us. When she came to live with us, she took my spot with Aunt Stella in the bed. And where was Claire to go? Well, I happened to be very small for my age, and they put a crib in my mom and dad's bedroom. And I thought I was only about 4, and Aunt Millie told me, no, you were about 6. And that was my bed, the crib. But if we lie in our bed now, we see that we don't need too much room above our head and feet. So that was fine. And I didn't know that I was being underprivileged, so to speak. I was happy. And Aunt Millie was like an older sister to me because she was only 6 years older than my brother. So she was like an older sister to me. And
What was she like as a child?
what was Aunt Millie like?
Yeah, all of you and your other
We were
siblings.
all
would consider her.
extremely closely knit. Everyone in the family, all of the aunts and uncles, we were all in walking distance. And now Aunt Millie lives for many years in California because she moved there due to her husband's ill health. He had to be in warmer climate. And she vowed that our closeness would always remain, even though we were 3,000 miles apart. And indeed, it did, and still does. Because right now she is 87 years young, and I do mean 87 years young. To look at her, you would never think it, and to speak with her, she is just sweet and caring, and everyone loves her, and deservedly so.
Tell me about your brother Bernie and your sister Stellar growing up. Different personalities than yourself.
We all had different personalities. You could have 5 children in a family, and they could all have different personalities. The only thing we had in common was being loved in the family. Stella and Bernie would sometimes have their little arguments, and he would always give her a belt in her shoulder with his fist. And I would say, "Oh, you're hurting her." They never picked on me because I was the baby. But they were both very bright. I was considered bright also, but I thought I was third man on the totem pole. And I remember very vividly, they made in our day and age, after 6th grade, if you had a certain IQ and did well in school, you were able to make junior high school in a shorter length of time. You skipped. And that was called RA, the Rapid Advance. And when of course, Bernie and Stella made the Rapid Advance very easily. And when I came home after 6th grade, and I came running home and I said to Grandma, Mom, I got into the RA. And she said, "Oh, thank God." Not that I would have cared, Claire. It wouldn't matter to me, but I don't ever want your sister or brother to be able to say that you were a little dumber than they were. But the truth was, I was not quite as bright as they were. I was a good student, but they were even better students than I was.
Do you remember your grandparents?
I don't remember my grandpa, whose name was Harris, but they all called him Harry. I just recalled this man, this slender man, because I was only 2.5 or so when he died. I
Whose
remember
father was he?
that was my mother's. That was my mother's dad, and of course Baba Khana, as we called her, remained for many years after that. In fact, it had to be many years because my first appendix attack when I was 13, my Baba Khana had the ice pack in the area because she was told if it hurts you near that side, maybe it's your appendix. Well, 3 years later, my appendix was removed, and she was right. It was my appendix. Again, very loving and very caring people.
Where were they from?
Russia. They stem from Russia.
Do you know where?
A very small place. I think they said Slunum. I'm not too familiar with that. My mother was only about 3 years old when she came to the United States, so it's just from hearing about it. Whereas my dad got to this country when he was 13, but he came from from a city, Kiev, which was a sizable city. And I was told that he happened to like poetry, which is something I like to do, and I felt very saddened that they didn't have one piece of his work. I would have really enjoyed seeing that. And I believe his father, which means Jack Pollock, was my dad. His father was Barnett Pollock. And he was somehow, even though he was of the Jewish faith, which wasn't too easy living in Russia at the time, but he was with the police department of sorts. He was a very brilliant man. And they had a very high level of living for people in their circumstances there didn't have the kind of income that he evidently had. Because I was told that my Grandma Nova, who was Barnett Pollock's wife, and my dad's mother, they had so much extra money that when she gave birth, she had wet nurses, and I never knew what a wet nurse was. It meant that another woman that had milk in her breasts because she had children would breastfeed the children. The mother that had so much money didn't even have to bother breastfeeding her children. So that goes back many, many years ago.
And that was in Russia?
That was in Russia.
And then what was the circumstances that brought them to the United States?
I guess things that were changing, especially for the Jewish people in Russia. My dad was 13 when he came to the United States. And I talking about him now, I recollect that I found out when I was 18 that my parents, Sadie and Jack, eloped, which shocked me terribly because my mother was so low-keyed and sweet. I mean, I couldn't picture her eloping. What happened was that I don't think my mother's parents were very happy with Jack Pollock because he was like a playboy. He came from what they considered wealth, and my mother's family did not. Her dad was a house painter, and they had a struggle from hand to mouth, and they just didn't think he was for her. And a cousin of hers, whose name was Lena Luca, told them that she thinks that my mother was married secretly to Jack, and they approached my mom and were ready to throw her out of the house. They just didn't believe her. And because of that, she eloped with my dad, my dad, who, of course, was your grandpa. And I think back now, it seems unreal because it's bringing me back to so many years ago.
What's crossing your mind now? What memory are you thinking of?
That I can't believe I'm telling these stories that were so long ago and far away.
What did your father do for a living, the Playboy?
The Playboy, he played a lot. He, to my knowledge, I can't remember other than the fact that he was a wheeler dealer, as I understand. I was very young when I knew he was wheeling and dealing, and he had gotten into a little trouble many years ago. I understand he got in trouble with some people that were bootleggers, and that was not a nice thing to be involved in, but the money was easy, the money was good, and he did get in trouble because of that. And I couldn't believe that that would happen with his wife being so low-keyed and sweet. And as I said, they talk about my Yiddish mama. That was my mom. Her jewels and her treasures were her children's smile. Material things were unimportant to her. And if she was handed a lemon, she would just make lemonade. I mean, she always saw the good things because she was surrounded by her wonderful children who were her life. We were definitely her pride and joy. And then years went by, and he had to face reality. And he had gotten in trouble because of being in that line of work. And after getting out of trouble, he went into the luncheonette business. It was a family business, and we all had to participate. And it was a hard business because it was 7 days a week, late hours. And I was only about 13 at the time. And I looked younger. I always looked younger because I was small.
You still do.
Oh, yeah. I always say I'm going to lie about my age because right now I'm 75. And I say I'm going to lie about my age only if my daughter will lie along with me because I was a teenager when your sister was born.
We'll get to that as well.
I'm sure we will.
So your parents owned a luncheonette.
The luncheonette. It was a neighborhood luncheonette, and we all worked behind the counter. And then the war years had hit, and my brother, of course, couldn't. He was busy being in college, and I do remember he graduated from City College, but they took him straight into the Army, and my sister Stella and my mom had to go get his diploma from CCNY, and he was an honor student, you know. He specialized in accounting. The war interfered. He would have continued with law. And as time went by, we graduated to a bigger and different type of luncheonette, which was in Brighton Beach.
Now, if I can interrupt now, especially for your great-grandchildren, your grandchildren, luncheonettes back then, as I recall you telling me as a youth, were a little bit different. People didn't have refrigerators at home or freezers for ice cream, and there was a much more camaraderie that transpired in these luncheonettes?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone was your neighbor that came there. Everyone, as they said, hung out, the teenagers, especially if you had a Nickelodeon or a radio going. And I remember going to Montauk Junior High across the street from Dad's business, and there were 2 lunch hours. One lunch hour, I stood behind the candy counter eating my sandwich and selling the candy to the kids at the same time. And we had newspapers and magazines in those days in that particular store. We were so glad when he graduated to a better luncheonette because my sister and I were in charge of the returns and I still remember American magazine or international, and we had to label I or A for the returns every month that did not sell. And they used to leave 2 cents on the newsstand for the Daily Mirror or the Daily News. And all of this took time. And everyone was neighborly because everyone met. Everyone bought an egg cream. Everyone bought a 2-cent plain, which was a little glass of seltzer. And one fancy lady I recall sticking in my mind when I was so young came in, and she was very fancy. She lived in the elevated building. There weren't that many elevated buildings near the store. And she said, "Can I please have some Vichy, Claire?" And I didn't know what Vichy was. And I ignored her question of, would you be giving me some Vichy? And finally I had to look at her, and I said, "I don't know what Vichy is." And she said, "It's seltzer. I'll have a 2 cents plain." And I thought, this fancy lady was asking me for Vichy and is asking me for a 2 cents plain of seltzer. She couldn't say seltzer. And that entered my mind just now thinking of that luncheonette.
Where was this luncheonette?
43rd Street and 16th Avenue in Brooklyn. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, Borough Park section, which right now, not right now, because I'm living on Long Island 42 years, and I saw the change taking place where the Hasidim sect of Judaism was setting in, and I knew it wasn't the lifestyle, while I always had deep feeling for my religion and feelings, always thinking of the Holocaust and thinking if we were there, no matter how good we were as people, it would have been us in the ovens. But I didn't want that area, even though I loved the area that we lived in, because I wanted my kids to have a more familiar upbringing in their teenage years than with the people that believed as they did, with the Black Hatters, you know.
Well, we're going to get to that actually on our second disc.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me anything else that's kicking up now from your youth, like favorite memory of your childhood.
Oh my goodness, my favorite memory.
What was your best memory?
Of course, all my girlfriends. We were all.
What were their names? Do you remember some of the names?
Oh, golly. There was Etty, and there was Ruthie, and there was Gloria Katz, and my friend Bunny came on later on. But in our day and age, you came home from school and couldn't wait to play ball. My name is Anna, et cetera, et cetera. And we played what we called Potsy, which some people called hopscotch, but it was Potsy, and you had my favorite thing because I was very good at Potsy, was folding up a used banana peel because it wouldn't roll. It had to land where I aimed. And we jumped rope, double Dutch, French, and we played marbles, which we called immies. And my sister would always make sure to get what was called the puries. And I said, "They're not really yours, they're mine." And she says, "But I'm older than you are, and I think I should have them." And it was Johnny on a Pony, hide and seek, and it was so many games that you don't see in this day and age. There was no television. There was no extra money, and I do recall saving pennies until I had 5 pennies and I was able to buy my own Spalding ball, so that when we played My Name is Anna, I had my own ball. And as I said, it seems like 100 years ago.
Slightly different to think of that now with your grandchildren going to stores now and with their little games costing $50 a pop for the little computer games.
Sometimes I sometimes wonder, we do live in a different world, and this is called progress, but I sometimes wonder if just playing and making your own games together wasn't as happy, and now I think memorable. Of course, when we got Monopoly, that was a big deal. That was really a game. But even though we didn't have fancy things, we had good times. And we didn't know that we weren't well off because there was always food on the table, and there was always love in the house. And that's, I think, my cry in life to all of my children, that maybe I brainwashed them. I don't think I brainwashed them. It's because you all came from such a happy household. But it's always love and caring, because it's something money can't buy. And fortunately, we do have that in our family.
Yes, we do. Tell me, you started to tell me about your youth. Tell me about a perfect day when you were young. Close your eyes and think of a perfect day you had, and what transpired. Start in the morning and go up.
there were so many perfect days. What age do I start at? Do I think of a perfect day that I met Dad? We were very young. I was 16 and he was 17 when I was already going with him. One of his friends, Dad went to Erasmus High School. I went to New Utrecht High School, even though we lived close by geographically. And Erasmus High School, which was in Flatbush, was considered the elite. And one of his friends was on the train with me. We had to take the train to go to New Utrecht from where we lived. And his name was Bert Samet. And he said to my very close friend Bunny, I think I should introduce Claire to Irv Fishman because I think that they would like each other. And my response was, I don't have to meet anyone else because there's enough boys that hang out at my dad's luncheonette, and I don't really have to meet someone else.
How old were you?
At the time, I was about 15 when he wanted to introduce me to him. And one day, we all used to go to the Y, and everyone hung out at the Y. We would play music, and we would dance there, and all the basketball players from junior high and high school would be there, and they were the top-notch guys, you know. And one night it was raining very hard and no one was going to go to a movie from there. Everyone remained at the Y. And I looked at my friend, Etty, and I said to her, who is that tall, good-looking guy over there? And she started to laugh and gave me the business. She said, that happens to be Irv Fishman, who you did not want to meet. And I said, really? And she said, yep. And she was needling me, and I said, $5 bet that I'll have a date with him in 1 week. I didn't have $5 to my name because I didn't have 5 cents to my name, but that was the expression I used. And it was his close friend, Jackie Ostromoff, who approached me because at that time I had very chubby cheeks, like you. And he came over and he said, I've got a frog in my throat. He said, Irv, he called over to Irv, who caught my eye. He said, doesn't she have cute cheeks? And he glanced up and quickly said, yeah, and went back to the girl he was talking to, and I couldn't forget her name. Her name was Lila Pollock, the same last name that I had. And I never forgot that. And then we all went to the beach one day, supposedly studying for regents. It was the beginning of June, and your dad was there, who of course is Irv Fishman. And he was sitting there, and there was this girl, Lila, sitting near him. And I said, guess it's a girlfriend. He must like her a lot. And I'm sitting there, and they were playing poker, and I knew just a little bit about the game. And accidentally, truly accidentally, my elbow happened to hit Dad's waist or shoulder.
Excellent.
And he jumped and said, oh, don't do that. I'm very ticklish. And I remember very vividly, it was a very special day. I said, I didn't do that intentionally. I happened to move my arm and it happened to grab your side. And after he started talking to me for a while, I said, you know, your girlfriend is sitting there alone. He said, she's not my girlfriend. I said, well, you seemed to be with her at the Y last week and you're with her now. And he said, well, any girl that's a friend of mine is a girlfriend, I guess. And then this wit of mine said, oh, I wouldn't like to be that to a boy. I wouldn't want to be to him what every other girl is to him. And with that, he said, well, what can we do to make it more so? And I was trembling inside because I really wasn't such a big shot. And I said, one of my friends moved to the Midwood section and she's making a sweet 16. And so I guess we were approaching 16. And she would like to know if any of us want to bring some boys with us so that we don't have to go alone, because we were in Borough Park and Midwood section, which was a very lovely section of Brooklyn. And he said, yeah, I would like to do that, and I'll get some of my friends, but why can't I see you next weekend before that party? And I said, okay. He said, we could go to Coney Island. And he got Jackie, who was the one that really liked me first and came over to me first, and ended up, was always our dearest friend. I hooked him up with one of my friends, and we went to Coney Island, and that was a very memorable day because it worked into a great love affair.
Was that your first relationship?
Yes.
First real?
Yes.
First and only. Did you ever get the $5 from your friend?
Oh, she didn't have $5 and I didn't have $5. And she was just glad because they all adored Dad. The whole world adored Dad. He was the sweetest, uh, kindest to everyone. I don't think there was ever a person that he said a nasty word to. And even when we were in business, I don't think he was ever angry, or if anyone didn't have an extra buck, his hand went into his pocket. He was a very caring person.
We're going to get to him also a little later on. I'm trying to do chronologically.
Yeah,
and
but
for
you
my family who is
understand
listening to this, you know this is the best I can do with my mother.
There's no need to, do it chronologically unless you really want to.
Oh, I'm just teasing. I have to
Okay.
we have to throw some humor in there with my family.
Okay.
Tell me, how did your husband propose to you?
Gee, I don't know if it was an actual proposal. I mean, it became an automatic thing that we knew was going to happen. He left high school in his senior year. It was the war years. He was one of the youngest to go in, and his friends, who were only 6 months older than him, already had gotten the Purple Heart by crawling their way through Germany. And I get choked up when I think of it because I did watch that movie Private Ryan, and they were so young. And Dad realized he did not want to go into the infantry, and you couldn't be drafted to the Navy. You had to enlist. So in his senior year of high school, and it seems so unreal in this day and age, he left to enlist in the Navy. And he went to the Navy at 17 and a half. And we were already, quote, going steady. For my 17th birthday, I got what was called a cocktail ring. It was not an engagement ring, but it was considered the thing. We were the item. It meant that it was serious. And of course, his parents happened to love me instantly, and I loved them instantly. And they became very good friends with my parents, which made it very comfortable. And
They couldn't have been very old themselves.
they weren't. When I met my father-in-law, I realized now my father-in-law was 39 years old. And he loved me a great deal because he thrived on affection, and I happen to be a very affectionate person.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. And it was understood without ever a proposal. All I know is that when he finally got back, he was shipped to the Philippines, and there again, he stayed with Aunt Millie, who was already living in California with 2 little children, because she went because of her husband's health. And we were all very saddened. And I do remember that Dad and I were babysitters for the first cousins in the family because they all took Aunt Millie out.
What were their names? Use names when we're talking, if you can remember.
Harvey and Mel Galan was my Uncle Sammy's boys. And it was in their house that Dad and I stayed because Aunt Millie's children, who was Diane and Howard Banchik, were there. And we babysat for these 4 kids. Because they were taking Aunt Millie out, Uncle Mort was already in California and found an apartment, a 1-room apartment that she had to go to with 2 children because it was war years, you couldn't find apartments. And that's when I wrote that wonderful poem about them, because I remember that when they came back from the dinner, I said, "How was it?" And all of them were there with red eyes, all the sisters and brothers, my aunts and uncles, because they were crying throughout the whole dinner. It wasn't very easy because whether it was Rosh Hashanah, whether it was Yom Kippur, no matter when it was, we were always together. The bagels, the lox, everything, we were always together within walking distance. And I always tease Howard Banchik, who was 11 years younger than I am, that he was the first baby I ever wheeled, because even though I'm the youngest child in my family, I had the first grandchild on both sides of the family. And so there were no nieces and nephews for me to wheel, but the only person that I felt was a nephew was Aunt Millie's son, because Aunt Millie lived with us and I thought she was my older sister. And now Howard Banchik, who fortunately is a very successful man in California.
They did pretty well from that 1 room, didn't they?
He didn't take 1 penny from them since he was 11 years old. He had 3 jobs, and I still recall. He had a newspaper route. He babysat, and because he was taking music lessons on the sax, he was helping some other kids play the saxophone. He is a very, very successful in finance. And God bless him because my investments are with him, and that's why I could live the lifestyle that I'm living.
Well, he's
Because
helped most of the family with his real estate and shopping
absolutely,
centers.
he did everything for the family. The family comes first.
Guess we should be happy you pushed him around in that cart.
Yeah, but he did it for people that didn't push him around. And right now he just had surgery on near the Achilles heel, and I just mailed a letter, a get well card yesterday to him just to tell him I'm thinking of you. And
So, what year did your aunt move to California?
oh golly, uh, if Dad was 17 and he was born in 27,
44.
well, that would be about it. Aunt Millie moved out there in 44.
So 44. So now we're coming up on this year will be 60 years since they moved, and you still are close with these people.
Close.
As we all are, of course. But
Aunt Millie and Uncle Morty were working class people, and she said, we will never, ever forget our closeness. And I was the first person that Cousin Howard ever came to visit after saving all his money from his little jobs. And he stayed at our house, and I remember he walked in. We got to the airport, and we welcomed him, Dad and myself, and I said, hi, Howie. And he said, Claire, I don't like to be called Howie. I like the name Howard. And I have to laugh because you know your brother's name is Howard. They're both named for their grandpa Harris. And I laughed to myself because I only call Howard Howard the same way he requested. And Aunt Millie knew Dad only a short while when Dad was shipped to California. And we knew he was going to the Pacific. It's such a baby when I think now when you see the kids just graduating from high school and going on to college. And he was a typical sailor, 6'1", slim and young and adorable. And he would go to visit Aunt Millie. And Aunt Millie, he lost deposits with a friend of his, another sailor, in a hotel because Aunt Millie wouldn't let go of him. She was so homesick that she went to a neighbor's house because the neighbor had a husband who was a traveling salesman. So Dad slept with Uncle Mort, who was Aunt Millie's husband, and Aunt Millie went next door to sleep with her neighbor because the husband wasn't there. And this happened for about 6 weeks or so before he had to go overseas. And of course, they bonded so closely. In those 6 weeks, she felt she had a piece of home by having Dad there. And Dad fell in love with them, which was easy to do. And we knew that Howard would be a good businessman, even though he specialized in music, because he would wait every weekend to see the tall, skinny, he and Diane, his little sister. And Dad would come walking down the block, and Dad first started to smoke his first cigarette when he was in service. He never smoked before that. And Howard looked at him and had one of these Zippo lighters, I think. And he said, I found this lighter. Would you like to buy it from me? And Dad said, well, okay. How much do you want? And he said, $1. And Dad said, well, there's a little dent in this cigarette lighter. And he said, yes, but it doesn't affect the use of the lighter. And Dad later on told me, and I think he put it in a letter, because I have every letter your dad ever sent to me. It's in my closet. As the sliding door opens, the upper left-hand corner is every letter your dad ever sent to me. And he wrote me about that. And he said, someday he's going to be a good businessman, which came to be.
Shocking that you've saved the letters. Actually, not shocking. As we spoke driving here, there's very little that you haven't saved over your years.
It's true. I'm guilty of that. Perhaps it's because maybe one of the reasons is that I had very little growing up as a young child, and I treasured every doll and every ball that I had and anything that was meaningful to me, and especially that I have the room. If I didn't have the type of room that I have, being in a ranch house, the basement is very large, and it's a 3-room apartment, so I certainly didn't take away from anyone's comfort by saving things. But if anyone was stuck for something, whether they needed a costume, because, I did shows at the temple, if anyone needed a costume for Halloween or something, they would come to Claire. Do you happen to have? And I would say, yes, I do, because they know, is it a rat packer that they call it, a rat pack?
No, the rat pack was Frank Sinatra and his friends. You're a pack rat.
Oh, I'm a pack rat?
Yes.
I think I would have enjoyed the other a little better.
Well, I think we'll get into that as well. I know that when life got better and you had vacation time to Vegas and San Juan and places that you like
Monte
to go.
Carlo.
Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna probably save that for a little bit later. I want to. Is there anything that you could think about from your youth that because God willing, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren, your great great grandchildren will listen to this. That there's anything that you'd like
I'm
to.
not up to great great grandchildren.
No,
up,
but
up to great grandchildren.
well, I'm hoping that this disc will carry on, which is one of the reasons that I'm doing it. And
I will say this: the day that Dad got out of service, he looked like he was a concentration camp victim. He was about 160 when he went in. He was a tall guy. He got out. He was about 145, and he whispered something to Grandma Rosie, that was his mother, that did she have the ring set? That was the official engagement ring that I got, which was his grandpa's stone in a ring, and they had it set for me, which I didn't know about until that day. And that was a very memorable day.
I remember my father telling me a story when he was in the Philippines that they were on an island waiting for the enemy to come. And it turned out the enemy didn't show up. And then they had found out that had the enemy shown up, that the amount of ships that they had, they would have wiped out the U.S. fleet
Oh,
there.
the highest peak on that island, which was Marcus Island in the Philippines, was 15 feet high. It was an emergency spot. You were able to walk right around it by foot very easily. The sad part in one of the letters, and he was so seasick, he had eaten one orange in 4 days, and that's why we have never, ever gone on a cruise. No matter how many vacations we took, he would never go on a ship again.
Yeah, as I recall, my father joined the Navy and wasn't good on boats. Which was
That's right.
A little difficult to do.
Especially that they weren't cruise ships. But they expected a tidal wave to hit, and they left a squad of volunteers. Maybe they weren't volunteers, but they were told they're staying. And they had to get on this LST, or I may be saying it incorrectly. And the waves were so terribly high, and they all got deathly sick. The actual tidal wave did not hit their island. But when the war was finally over and they thought there were not enemies close to them because they were on a flat piece of land, right opposite them were mountains. And after the war, hundreds and hundreds of Japanese people were coming out of the mountains, and they never knew they were that close to them. So I think back now, they were such young boys.
What was it like to receive a letter? Do you remember the feeling of anticipating his letters?
Oh, every day I waited. In fact, the mailman, that was the mailman when my dad moved to Brighton Beach to a sizable luncheonette. He would see me coming down the steps from the platform. It was my senior year of high school, and I didn't want to remain to switch to Lincoln High School in Brooklyn because I wanted to be with all my friends. So I had to take a train in the bitter cold on an open station from Brighton Beach to one stop, if anyone knows Coney Island, Stillwell Avenue, and then take a train the West End to get to the school. And as I would be coming home, I had a condensed program, which meant I didn't have any study hall so that I could get home earlier to be able to help out in the store because we couldn't get enough help during the war. We had a big sign, which many places had, "Be kind to our help, customers are easy to get." We just couldn't get enough help, so I had a condensed program. And my sister and I, my brother was in service, my sister and I worked behind the counter. And we had Johnny, a counter man that loved flipping eggs and missed a lot of times. And I just stared at my father, and he knew what my stare meant. Don't open your mouth or say anything to him. We can't let him go, because we had a lot of problems getting help. But this sweet mailman that knew everyone on the block, there were six-story buildings on the block of Brighton 7th Street. And this mailman, who was such a sweet guy, would spot me as he would be walking the street. He would see me coming down from the steps to come downstairs from the platform of the Brighton Beach station, and he would hold up fingers of how many letters I received that day. Sometimes it was 0, and sometimes it was 3, according to how fast they could get it out from the Philippines. I feel very young now that I'm discussing that. And on the other hand, I feel very old that my husband's gone this month, 9 years. But
Yeah, he's very missed.
very. I always said that if someone said, I never met her, I said it was your loss. And I meant it sincerely because he was such a sweetheart of a guy. My mother would constantly say to me, biologically, I know Irva's not my son. I didn't give birth to him, but you know he's my son. And I said, yes, I do, because my parents, after they were out of the luncheonette business, Dad went into the limousine business, but they were always at my house. That's where they were comfortable, and my house was the meeting place. And I know that this is not, the continuity is not
It's fine, no.
so good.
It's fine. You just keep going. Let's talk about Vivian. No.
There's just a few minutes left also on this one.
Okay. Is there anything you think we missed? We're going to use it as part one and part two based on our two sessions from the time before you were married that we've covered, because we're going to probably go more into discussions of when you got married and started having children and you became the parent and the moves and the moving to Long Island and raising children. Is there anything prior to that you think, can you think of that you'd like to talk about or have your family know about?
Well, the years that we were in Brighton Beach, I considered myself going, quote, steady with Dad. And there were a lot of nice-looking guys that lived on the block that would ask me out. And I would tell them that I really do not go out with anyone else. And, of course, they all hung out because, as I repeat, there was no TVs. There were no freezers for ice cream. There were no... everyone came to buy soda. They didn't have bottles of soda like you see in supermarkets today. And everyone hung out. Everyone met their friends there. And there were so many young women who were newlyweds and their husbands were overseas. Some had babies that their husbands never saw, so they would come and meet each other. And it was the place that neighborhood people could meet, and everyone felt for one another, especially if anyone heard of someone being killed. Everyone was devastated. The stars in the window, everyone had flags for the number of people in their family that were in service. One star was for every person in the armed forces. And so I didn't go out with any of those guys. I mean, I was friends with all of them. And then I have Uncle Murray, who I love dearly. It's my father's youngest brother, who's only 6 months older than my brother was. And he was in the Navy also, and he came to take me out. He was on leave. And he took me out, and we hit the corner of Brighton 7th and Brighton Beach Avenue. He's taking me to the movies. I still remember Spellbound with Ingrid Bergman. And it was King's Highway. Tomorrow, if you ask me my name, I might forget it, but right now I'm remembering that. And all the boys were standing on the corner, and they looked at us, and I said, we thought you don't go out with any guys. And I said, no, you don't understand. This is my uncle. Well, of course, he didn't look like an uncle. And they said, yeah, he looks like your grandpa. And I always tease Uncle Murray about it, who was my Lindy Hop partner, who I spoke to yesterday to see how he was doing. And certain things I recall before Dad got out of service in Brighton Beach. I didn't spend many days on the beach because we really were always kept busy in the store. And one night we sent Grandma up early because she was so tired. She did the home cooking. On Brighton Beach, there were kosher butchers, at least 3 on every block, and all of them were customers because they knew what meat Grandma was serving. And all of them came to our wedding, as a matter of fact. But I learned all my Yiddish songs from the Nickelodeon. Half of it was the English songs, and half was from the Barry sisters. And my dad had a nice voice and would always be singing it, and that's how I learned to love some of the Yiddish music. They were good days. Of course, we were sad because the war was still on. And Grandma always worried about me, that I might not pass my regent, because here it was Regent Week and I couldn't study. And I recall something very vividly. I was behind the counter. It was 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday, and I was taking my first regent the next day. And a man is sitting at the counter with a girlfriend. I assumed it was his girlfriend. And I looked at him and I said to him, is your name Mr. Pollock? Which was my maiden name. And he said, yes. And I said, and you're a teacher in the Utrecht High School? And he said, yes. I said, well, I don't happen to have you as a teacher. I have Mr. Fox for the same subject for 3 years, and he's my homeroom teacher. but I go to New Chick. He said, but you live here. I said, but it's my senior year. I didn't want to switch to Lincoln High School. And he turned around to this lady friend of his, and he said, I'm looking at this young girl working here at 11 o'clock at night, and sometimes when I see a kid that might be tired in school, I think they just stayed up late at night listening to the radio or not wanting to go to sleep. And here I see someone working, and I had made him a nice ice cream sundae because Grandpa always believes in the fact you give extra whipped cream, it costs you a fraction of a penny, and you get a reputation. And he did. We had a great reputation for making good sundaes, egg creams, ice cream sodas. In fact, I had at the foot of the station, there was a front window, and I had a Coke and two seltzer spouts, and the guy that was the manager of the Woolworths on the block was so sweet. He would give Grandpa for the weekend, for Sunday, they weren't open on Sunday in Woolworths, a big glass drum, and Grandpa used to put in all flavored syrups with ice and water and called it punch. And that was one of the drinks, because everyone coming off the beach or coming down we were at the foot of the station. And of course, if I was able to take in $300 on my register for 5-cent drinks, I had to make a lot of drinks. And
Yes,
that's something that I remember.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just had one more question about your mother. Do you think that she led the kind of life that she wanted to? You said she was always worried, and I guess she worked at the luncheonette. Did she ever dream of doing anything else, do you think?
No, prior to becoming a mother, prior to that, I know that there was one man that was in the stone business of some sort, and I always recollect her mentioning casually that, I forget his name now, that he was extremely fond of her and a very wealthy man. But she was already smitten with my dad, even though her parents weren't thrilled with him. But she had worked prior to that. Once she became a mother, her feeling was just her children, her lifestyle, her husband, the children. That was it. And I can't say I was her favorite, but I was her youngest, and I was the closest. And the last 4 years of her life, she was in the Woodmere nursing home, and I was there every single day, and the people there thought I worked there. And I would tell the owner, yeah, I work here, but I don't get a check at the end of the week.
We're going to ask more about her in our next tape. We're going to take a little break now, and we'll be back.
Part 2 to be continued.
Hi, my name is Andrew Fishman. I'm here in Grand Central at Story Corps. It's Wednesday, December 17th, 2003. And I have my mother, Claire, with me. And we're doing an audio tape of some questions for the generations to hear to come after us. Can you tell me your name, birth date, please?
Claire Fishman, and I was born February 17th, 1928. That's a long time ago.
And we're actually on part 2 of our tape, of our disc, and I thought we would talk a little bit about when you first got married and where you lived with your husband, my father Irv. And let's start with that. Tell me a little bit about early marriage.
Well, I'd like to get started with the fact that the wedding was large. The whole instant world, I think, was invited. The Fishman family had a big family, as the Pollock family did. And I do remember just before the ceremony that I started to cry, and my brother Bernie, who is gone, unfortunately, said to me, "You're going to be fine." And I was really nervous. And I am certainly an extrovert, but I was just nervous about the whole shindig that was taking place. And of course, everything went smoothly, and everyone had a very good time. And we already were fortunate enough to have what we called a basement walk-in apartment. And we were glad to get it because you couldn't get apartments, but his uncle Artie Klein lived on the block in a private house, and that's how we got the apartment. And fortunately so, because 9.5 months after I was married, my daughter Cheryl was born, and it was good that we had an apartment where to put a crib.
So you were married in 46.
I was married December 8th, 1946. And my daughter was born September 23rd, 1947. And I was just so glad that it was after 9 months, because in that day and age it was a no-no to fool around. And everyone was counting on their fingers, because while I was always considered a slim person, I was huge with the pregnancy. When I entered my 9th month, I recall that I had gained 40 pounds and told the doctor I will not get on the scale anymore during my 9th month, which I did not. But I guess I must have gained about 50 pounds on my frame. That was a lot. And Cheryl was born with a condition which was called pyloric stenosis, which meant the muscle to her stomach was closed, and the formula would just rest in the stomach area going down, and then all of a sudden it would just go shooting out. And it was very scary, and Dad was all of 20, and he wouldn't even go near her, because when she would be throwing up, it was from the nose and the mouth, and the head would be wobbling, and it was really scary. And I remember telling him, don't tell anyone what I'm telling you now. I'm supposed to be happy having a baby, but I don't think I'll ever be the girl you married. I will never smile again, because I was so scared. And the doctors thought, give us 48 hours for thick farina, no liquid. With a 2-week-old, thick farina on a tongue, what were you going to do? To see if they could get her to stretch. It's like a bagel without a hole in it, and that hole has to open for the liquid to go through. And here we were 2 kids. We didn't have parents that could help us. Grandma was busy in the luncheonette business. Grandma Rosie didn't have a car and didn't want to take a bus. And Dad couldn't help me too much. But as time went by, we did find that it was able to work. I had to make formula, then farina every hour and a half around the clock, and it wasn't easy. And that was the start of a new marriage. But of course, we were very much in love and very caring for each other. And Dad never raised his voice and never got upset about anything other than my well-being. And then, of course, years later, my son Howard was born. And he, too, was born with the same condition, but I knew what we could do for him, because then we made the farina and the formula in one bottle with a very big nipple hole so that he had sucking satisfaction, which Cheryl didn't have, because she used to cry 21 hours a day. It was awful for the first 3 months. With Howard, I was able to cope with that condition, and it avoided the surgery. You, my son, you were born perfect. You did not have it. When Cheryl was born, there was a write-up from the Medical Association that most conditions that had this, that died, the children died, they called them sick babies. They weren't sick. They had this pyloric stenosis problem. And they said most of the mothers were in their teens. Well, I was in my teens with Cheryl, but I wasn't in my teens with Howard, and he too had the same condition. But they're healthy after that, and they're strong.
I've seen them eat. They seem to be doing just fine.
They're doing great. But that was the start of the marriage, which was a little trying, but we made through it. And
where did Dad work when you first got
Dad
married?
worked for my father-in-law,
What did they
Fishman Quilt and Mattress Company, and he was a milestone there. Anyone that needed a mattress or pillows or comforters came to Joe Fishman. He was very reputable, a very honorable man, and he had different generations coming to him. And if anyone asked me where did I live, I just said, you know where Fishman Quilt Mattress is? Because it was it looked like a retail store from the outside. The operation of sewing was in the back of the place. And they all knew him. And he knew everyone because he was very extroverted also, and he loved people. Dad worked with him for a number of years, until we realized we couldn't get by on $75 a week when I had a second child already, and Grandpa wasn't too happy with that. In fact, he made a remark which upset me, because he was a young man.
What year was this?
He had said when Dad said he wanted to go out on his own and do something else, one of the mattress companies wanted deliveries and whatever, and start a delivery operation with the mattress companies, which he knew all of them. And Grandpa had said, even if you had to live on bread and water, I don't expect you to leave me. And I was very surprised that Grandpa Joe would think that way, because we had 2 children already, and
This was the early 50s.
There was never extra money in the business that could bail us out. Fortunately, I knew how to hold on to a buck, and I knew how to cook very well. So we always had enough food on the table. And of course, years went by and Dad started doing better, and Dad did go into business for himself.
What did he do?
Dad, unfortunately, we started with a manufacturing business of the drop-back sofas. And at the same time that we signed a very strong contract, he got a very big offer from either Serta or Simmons, mattress, whatever. And we couldn't take it because we were already tied up with this factory. And it was the first time anyone taking a mattress now will not see buttons on their mattress. They will not see strings on their mattress. They will only see quilting. And we were the ones that started the quilting tops. We would do the labor of the quiltings for the manufacturers of the mattresses. They would give it to us, and our machines were huge. And everyone said, Irv, thank God for this item. It is so hot. We will never use anyone but you. But words are cheap. They were doing so well, they did get their own machines, and we were in a bind. We were in a terrible bind. And we had to start making something else, and that was the drop seat sofa. A&S was, which is now defunct, but A&S was one of our big accounts. And you don't have big accounts of department stores where they complain and you don't give them credit. Someone could use it. It was supposed to be only if company came over. They were using it as nightly beds to sleep on. And it ended up we had to fold that factory. And then Dad was made an offer. We opened our own place. In fact, that's when I had sleep and help, because 3 days a week I went to work in the place. And I remember having sleep and help with you because I didn't want you.
What years were these? Try to remember.
You
the
were
years when
only
you say.
you were only about 2.5 at the time that we had that store in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And your sister and brother knew as soon as they came home from school, they were not allowed to leave the house until I got home, because I didn't want you to only be with the nanny that they call nanny now. I called it sleep and help. She happened to love you, but it still wasn't having your sister and brother with you. And Dad wasn't feeling well at the time. We did not know how sick he really was. And it ended up that Dad, at a very young age, became a severe diabetic. And I became the caretaker because he couldn't face up to what he was supposed to do. He was a very good patient, but thank God he was able to do well. And the insulin, whatever we had to do, he was able to live a so-called normal life with that. We did get involved with our own business, just opening the furniture department with Pinchuk stores downtown Brooklyn. They were a very big paint and flooring company. And then we became so big that Jack Pinchuk said he can't undertake having the responsibility of this operation and wanted Dad to buy it for himself. And Dad said, okay, you've got to put one stipulation in the contract. If anything happens to me, you have to buy my wife back. You have to buy out my wife so that she not be tied into the business with young children at home. And the store was good to us. The business was good to us. We started doing well financially. And things weren't as tight as they were for the years before, and we lived a good lifestyle. And Dad did well even with his condition, because he was always a good patient. All we had to do was go out for dinner with friends, and all I had to do was stare at him, and he knew what he could or could not eat without making an issue of it. And he was under good care, but I do remember after 15 years of being a diabetic, I still thought that they didn't know enough, and I went to study in Joslin Clinic in Boston. And I studied for 1 full week, every program they had. And my doctor, who was my pride and joy, Dr. Marienberg, said, all the papers you got, and he started calling me about some of his patients about diabetes. And that's when Dad said, you're AAG, also a doctor. That was my title. And I was just glad that I was able to take care of him. Unfortunately, he went through a lot of surgeries. 3 bypass of the leg to save amputation, 2 quadruple bypass of the heart, which was trying. But he was a fighter, and he really wanted to live and wanted to be with his family. So for the last 10 years of his life, it was 24/7 with me, and at the same time, Grandma Sadie was at the Woodmere Nursing Home for 4 years, and I was there every day with Dad because I never left Dad alone. And golly, I seem to go from one thing to another, but that's my makeup.
You're doing fine. It's the best you can do, Ma. Let's go back a little. Let's go back
Okay.
into the 60s. You moved into suburbia. You went out to Long Island.
You were 7.5 months old. And of course, we only had one car, and I was glad that with the baby carriage, I was able to walk not too far to a little shopping center. There was an A&P there, and that was great. I said, as long as I can take you in the carriage and do my shopping, I never cared. But then years went by, and your brother was having a bar mitzvah, and we bought a car from one of Dad's friends for me. It was a convertible that was in very sad condition, such sad condition that if I wanted to put in park whatever this car, I could have killed someone. If the car was in park, I was able to go in reverse. So we had a problem with that. But I had to take your brother to the temple for his services. And everything worked out there too. I managed. I always said that I can do it. And I'm grateful that whatever I had to do in the years that went by, I made sure my makeup was on, because if ever my makeup was off, Dad would say, "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" And I didn't want him to ever know how scared I really was. And I would say, "No, you know how I look without makeup." And I ran right into the bathroom to put on the makeup so that he not know how scared I really was, being the caretaker. And the years, as I say, were good to us. Your sister was married.
Well, it's interesting. You have had children in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s.
Exactly. You were my surprise, and I was never unhappy about it. I was just surprised. And Dad was very thrilled in one sense because our friends got married 10 years after we were married, and they were just starting their family. And I had just got finished telling them, I don't have to be your friends anymore. I don't have to hear about formulas or dirty diapers. I've had it. I've got a daughter that's almost 13. And then I find out that I'm pregnant with you, and I told them I really knew all the time, and they knew that I did not. And you actually grew up, I always said, with 2 mothers and 2 fathers, because your sister was 13, and you didn't know the difference between your sister and me. We were built the same way. The time you were 2 years old, if you didn't have me, you had Cheryl. And your brother Howard, who was only 8.5 years older than you, was born 40. He was always mature, still, he always was. Your sister always felt he was her older brother. Now she says it because she wants everyone to think that he's the oldest and not her. I keep saying I'm going to lie about my age, and they should all lie about their age in order to get me off the hook, because I'm 75 now. There's just so much that happened in all the years that I've lived that I feel I'm going from one thing to another.
That's fine. Well, you mentioned family, because I remember there was something, and a lot of families had it back then. It was called the family circle.
Oh, yes, indeed. The Pollock family were very, very funny, very humorous, and we had the greatest family circle. We called it the Cousins Club because we had a few generations. As is understandable, I myself had older, younger children and all. And that's how we happened to have the cemetery plot, which is 76 plots only for us in Beth Moses in Long Island, and let it be for generations down. In fact, I had bought 6 plots because I had only 2 children, and Dad and myself. And then when I found out I was pregnant with you, I called my brother Bernie, who was an accountant, a CPA, and he was in charge. And I said, are there still some vacant plots? And he said, yes. I said, well, I want to buy 2 more because I have another child. And in future years, many, many years from now, I want them all to know that they're in the family plot. And there's one very big stone that says Barnett Pollock Family Circle. And the benches are there. And Grandpa Jack always said at the meetings, I want to be the very first grave because I want to be the welcoming person. And that's exactly where he is, the very first grave.
And coincidentally, from your brother Bernie being in charge of the plots, now I am in charge of the plots.
That's right. You and your brother took over because he started spending most of the winters in Florida. Unfortunately, he passed away. Next month will be 3 years, and I still don't know why, because I don't think he should have died. It was something with stenosis of the lungs. Maybe he needed more oxygen, but with going to the top doctors in Cornell Hospital and his best friend's son, who was a top internist there, all the pulmonary men were called in, and he passed away, unfortunately. It's with me all the time.
And he is missed. Trying to reel you back in a little. We're gonna go into the late '60s. You said things turned around and economics got better and better.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember your first new car?
I think the first new car, I could be wrong. Your brother, who was a car maven since he's 4 years old and happens to be tire distributor today. I think the very first car may have been in 1957. That was before we were making it big, and that was something. It was a beautiful car. It was a Buick convertible, a black Buick convertible, where they used to have 3 circles right under the hood, and that was a jazzy car. The only thing that made me happy about it was your brother, who loved cars, used to get car sick. And if we had the convertible, which your dad, who was a kid himself, we weren't getting the convertible. We were in the showroom, and as we were placing the order, he saw the convertible, and he said, Claire, like a mother hears a child pleading with her, he said to me, can I please get a convertible? I always wanted a convertible. Well, we were married at 18 and 19. He didn't have too much time to, to see these things come through. And I said, before my heart leads, while my heart is saying yes, okay, get the convertible. And Howard was thrilled because while the top was down, he never got car sick. And I said, in the winter months, Howard, the car cannot have the top down. But he always loved that car. Years later, of course, we graduated. I do remember for our 50th anniversary, I think it was the first Lincoln Town car that we got, the cream-colored one. Maybe I had a black one before that.
Well,
I'm not sure.
I recall in the late '60s, you got a new Grand Prix.
Yeah, I hated that car. It was beautiful to look at. People stopped us because it was brand new and it was a sharp-looking car. But as my son Howard, who knows about cars, said, the motor was too large for the car. If it was even a damp rain and I went to turn the corner, I could go into a skid, and that always scared me. So the looks of the car was gorgeous, but I felt uncomfortable with the power that it had going slowly. Not that I was speeding, but that was a jazzy car. We graduated after that, and I became very thrilled with only heavy cars because I only had one accident in my life. And in that accident, it was Grandpa Joe's 4-month-old, the largest Chrysler, and it was totaled. And Grandma Sadie had five broken ribs, and the ambulance was coming, and your dad was putting together a bicycle of sorts for your brother, and he heard the ambulance going when he got the call. And all I know is I was terrified that I totaled his dad's car. And he said, I just knew where the ambulance was going. I'm just glad to see you alive. And from that time on, I think I would have been happy with heavy cars, which I do drive today. Only when I was in Italy, when we rented a small car, I was driving alongside small cars, and then that was okay with me. But I feel comfortable in big cars.
Okay. Tell me what you, life got better, you and your husband, my father, what did you do for enjoyment? I know you like to...
One thing that your dad really enjoyed was the crap table. We didn't go away for many periods at a time because we were in retail business. And when we bought the house in Long Island and we bought in Elmont, we were close to city limits because we were in a retail store that closed at 10 o'clock at night. And Dad would have gone to Oshkosh. He would have done anything for me. He was that type of guy. And I said, no, there are too many young widows around. I want to be as close as we can to the city limits to where our business was. And I'm getting off the track, I guess.
It's okay.
My memories are going to bring tears to my eyes. That's when we moved. That's when we moved to Elmont to be close to the city. And I forgot the last question.
Well, you said he liked the crap tables, and I know you used to like Vegas.
As things got better, we were invited by a friend of ours to go to Puerto Rico, and he was a high roller, and we went to the crap tables. Your father was a very small better then because he wasn't in position to bet like our friend Seymour, who had everything comped. And he really got to like the crap table. And a lot of men don't like their wives near them while they're gambling. Your father wanted me near him like crazy glue. And I said, if you want me close to you, I have to understand the game, which is really a very easy game. But if you don't know why people are getting excited, it's crazy. So, of course, not only did I learn the game, I even learned the odds on the numbers. And the truth is that while I would go with him, because he did become a high roller, never with food off our table, never a sick gambler. But we would go to Puerto Rico, which I loved very much in the winter months, and about 3 times a year we would go what was called junkets in those days. The whole plane were gamblers. Now it's VIPs. And they'll pick up, if you're a high roller, they'll pick up all your expenses. But we used to stay at the MGM, and Fred Migliori was the guy.
Where was this?
This was at MGM.
This is not in Puerto Rico.
No, Puerto Rico was our first place where Dad got a taste of the crap tables.
This is Las Vegas. You hadn't mentioned
This
that.
was Las Vegas, yeah, okay. MGM in Las Vegas. And I enjoyed playing blackjack, but I watched how I played. And when I saw how much was being gambled at the crap tables, I had a gulp sometimes. And I didn't know what on the come was. And then once I said, I have a feeling, or take the numbers off, just stay on the line. And he said, I can't. I said, why? He said, because I'm on the come line, and I cannot take off my bets on the come. And I said, whoever thought little Claire Fishman would be standing at a crap table discussing things like this with you? But we did take Howard. Your brother was graduating, and I knew that he was a type that would not get involved with gambling, and we took him for our first trip to MGM when it opened as a graduation gift. It was in May. He was graduating that year. And my first entrance to the MGM was, wow, it is huge. And your brother looked at me, he said, it's okay, you'll get used to it. I said, no, we're not leaving. We're going to stay. It's just tremendous. And then I found out it was the greatest hotel because everything was laid out so perfectly. All the restaurants were in line. The elevators were where they should be. The stores and all, the escalator down, taking you to the rear of the building. Now, of course, it's redone. I would not know Vegas anymore, and I have no desire to go back because it's got too many memories that I don't prefer to have. I have no desire to go there. Years went by, and when we couldn't go traveling, we even went to Monte Carlo, everything picked up. But when years went by, we settled for Atlantic City so that he had some pleasure. And I would say to Sally, my daughter-in-law, look at Dad sitting there. Always looked well-dressed, always looked like the gentleman. You never heard anything loud about him at a crap table, but he watched everyone's money. He was very good with figures. And I would look at my daughter-in-law and say, just look at Dad right now. He is in another world because he just enjoyed the action of a crap table. So that made me feel good that he had some pleasure. And one thing I'd like to get back to is about your grandpa. Because you wrote, when you were in college, you wrote something that your brother and sister thought you should have gotten an A excellent, called The Kitchen Corner. And it was in reference to the first time you ever saw a pine box at your grandpa's funeral. And I couldn't believe that you were just about 11 and a half or so, and you were in college and you thought of this story. And I think of Grandpa and his wit. He and his brother Abe sounded identical on a phone. You couldn't tell them apart. And they were very funny. All the trips that we took to Europe with our friends, my friends would be quoting Grandpa Jack. Because at home, if he was eating at my house, and he loved to eat at my house, and he loved the way I cooked.
He was pretty round. He loved to eat anywhere, Ma.
Oh, yes. He was portly, and he, as you wrote in your story, he would keep one spot in his kitchen and lure everyone into my kitchen, have a bite with me, If I forgot to put the water on the table, I would hear a voice from yonder say, Claire, I'll have another glass of water, which meant I didn't put water out. If I didn't put salt on the table, I would hear, Sadie, that's my mother's name, Sadie, salt must be getting very expensive. And I remember from our first luncheonette, of course I was a kid then, and I was a kid when I gave birth, one of our customers' daughter-in-law was next room to me. That was Maimonides Hospital, which was one of the biggest maternity hospitals in Brooklyn. She passes my room. At that time, we were living in Brighton at the time. And she stops, and the only one in the room was Grandpa. And she stops and walks in and said, "Claire," and I'm in a maternity hospital. She said, "What are you doing here?" And Grandpa, quick as a flash, said, "Didn't you hear she couldn't find an apartment?" I mean, this is how fast he was with his humor. And I had to fit that in because we all quote him to this day. Invariably, we will quote him. Is there another question?
Sure, there's plenty of questions. Tell me, we recently had a family portrait, and you continue to quote that there's an awful lot of people who have come
Well,
from...
should I start with my grandchildren first?
Why don't
the
you do
wedding?
that? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the family tree?
Well, my daughter is married to a wonderful guy named Lee, and they have two beautiful daughters, Allison and Jackie. Jackie, as a matter of fact, is named after my dad, Jack. In the Jewish faith, you name after someone is deceased, although Sephardic Jews will name after the living also. Then I have my son, Howard, who is married to Sally, and they have two beautiful daughters, Andrea and Erica. So that gives me 4 granddaughters. And then my son, Andrew, married Andrea, a beautiful little girl. And they have 2 great kids, Brandon, who just turned 11, and Alana, who is named for my husband, starts with an I for his name, and she's 8 years old. And that gives me a lot of children that came to be, especially that my number 1 granddaughter was married and has 2 little boys, which makes me a great-grandma of 2 precious great-grandsons. And my kids, God bless them for caring. And all I keep saying is love and caring, because money can't buy it. Be there, be supportive if anyone's in trouble. And I think that's true in my family. Would you agree that that's true with our family?
Absolutely.
And they decided they wanted to take a family portrait, right? You all decide a family portrait.
Yes.
We were all going to wear black T-shirts.
In 95-degree weather.
Yeah, well, not 95. It was June. And we all wore jeans. And it's hanging on my wall now, 16 by 20, with all of us on the picture. And I look and I say, my goodness, did this all start with 2 kids falling in love with each other, and it spread out to have a giant picture like this with so many of us on there and looking well? And I'm very proud of it. And I think the only thing I could ever show off about would not be material things, but I think I could show off about my grandchildren. I adore them. I happen to write poetry, Moon June stuff, but there's a poem for every grandchild. And it became harder with each grandchild because I wanted it to have their own identity and let them know that they're not number 1 or 4 or 6, that they all have a special corner in my heart, which is very true. And I think they love me like I love them. And my youngest granddaughter, Alana, if you ask Alana, what does Grandma Claire always say? Alana says, Grandma says it's nice to be nice. And I mean that even for grown-ups. It is nice to be nice. I don't wait for someone to say hello to me first. I will say hello to someone first and maybe get a smile from them. And my husband, may he rest in peace. I think I'm repeating that next month. Next month will be 9 years that he's gone. And I can't believe it because the void will always be there. But he would always say, my wife is so friendly that she even talks to statues. And I guess I am that friendly.
Claire, could you tell us one of the poems, if you can remember? Can you recite one of the poems that you've written for one of the Moon June poems?
Oh, I say Moon June stuff, meaning that it's just so, it's not like Cole Porter's lyrics. I write music and lyrics also. I wish I had one of the poems with me because I would be very glad to put it on this CD. As a matter of
have to come back and do
As
more.
a matter of fact, one of the poems was shown to a rabbi because my own rabbi had left our congregation, and someone that was across the street from my mother's nursing home was a very kind man, because I helped wheel the people for if they wanted to go to any. Sukkot is a very festive holiday. It's a time of growth and bearing fruit. And whatever it was, I asked if the rabbi would come to speak to some of them, because they were all wheelchair. They were not ambulatory. And I fell in love with this Rabbi Ginsburg, and I spoke to him when my mother was so sick, and I explained the situation. I said, I know the time is going to come, and my rabbi, for 28 years I was active in the temple, but he's in Florida now, and if the time comes that I need you, can I call upon you? And he said, yes, he was, and everyone fell in love with him. He's a very caring, sweet man. In fact, he officiated at my husband's funeral also. And I know I'm getting off the track again.
It's okay, Ma. We have to
Anyway,
set schedule.
my kids decided that when my husband was so very sick, because he was in ICU for 11 weeks between St. Francis Hospital and Long Island Jewish. And I never shed a tear while I was there, only when I walked through the doors. My makeup was on, my perfume was on, and I counted 11 drips going into him. And I just didn't want him to know he was dying. And my kids met with this Rabbi Ginsburg because we knew it was near the end. I told them that they could take him off the respirator because I knew it was over, and they wouldn't let him come home. They said he would have to go to a hospice. And I didn't understand. I thought hospices was only for cancer victims. I did not know that if they called him a lost heart. And since they couldn't do anything for him, he would have to go to a hospice, and that absolutely devastated me. So I did agree, with my daughter being there, we were crying about being taken off the respirator. And they went to speak to this Rabbi Ginsburg, and what my daughter did grab was one of the poems I wrote for our 15th anniversary. She said, I have to let him know a few details about you and Dad, because we all know what your life was like, but I want him to have a little insight. Never knowing that he read that poem at the funeral. And I was glad he did, because it was so meaningful. And I sometimes remember a few of the beginning of the sentences. Yes, I was 16 and you were 17 when we met. Excuse me. A date I had to get with you, $5 was my bet. How little did we know then what the outcome was to be. Who dreamed that two teenagers could fall as much as we. But mad about each other we were right from the start, and though we were so very young, one can't control the heart. I'm trying to think now. That's only the beginning.
You're doing great, Ma.
I'm doing great. I knew it by heart, completely by heart. Right now I'm stopping there. I know that I had said how special he was, and that each day my love for you goes deeper with every passing day. I ended every card I ever wrote to him, everything I ever did to him was ended because at our 10th anniversary, I was one that was flowery with words. He was flowery verbally, but not on with pencil and paper. And he gave me, at the time, we didn't have extra money then. It was our 10th anniversary, so how old was I? I was 28. He was 29. And charm bracelets were very in. And there was a heart with my calendar and a chip for February 17th. And behind it, it said, darling, I cherish the day you were born. And I said, oh my God, I saved a whole year to get him a gold watch. Well, how am I going to have it inscribed? And this man was a specialist called a Bamalucha. A Bamalucha, I was taught in Yiddish, is a specialist regardless of what field he is. My father-in-law was a great quilt maker. He was a Bamalucha when it came to quilts. This man was a Bamalucha in his script, which every jeweler thought was, and he was an artist. And I finally told the guy that got me the watch, give me another week. He said, this man may be gone by then. He's a very elderly man. I said, I don't want to put, I'll love you till the end of time. It's too commercial. I said, just give me another week. And finally it came to me. And I wrote, darling, I was blessed with the best when I married you. You're Claire. And it was true. And in fact, it's on his tombstone that we were blessed with the best husband Dad and Grandpa. I never wanted father or grandfather. I like Dad and Grandpa. And I find it difficult to go to the cemetery now, where I used to feel comforted to see my father. But I just seem to just see a pinstripe suit in a coffin, and I feel a little guilty, but I talk to him every day. I talk to his pictures, but I find that I get sick if I go to the cemetery now, and it does make me feel a little guilty. But I don't know if he could, as I said in one of the poems, I wrote a poem after he died, and I said that if there's a heaven above, I don't know, but he's certainly living through all of us, because it's true, he lives through all of us who love him so much.
What do you say? What do you say when you talk to you talk to the pictures? What do you say?
I don't know if you could see me. I don't know if you could hear me, but it's making me feel better to talk to you. And I wave to his picture because it's in my room every morning. And I sometimes tell him that I feel sad that he can't see the other grandchildren, because he was still, in this day and age, 67 is not such an old age to pass away, but it was really 57 that he had to stop working. And he was a good-looking guy, and he never looked sick until the very end. And he didn't look his age until the very end, when he was so deathly sick. And I look at this great picture of the two of us together, and my daughter-in-law happened to get this shot. It was at my son's wedding, and she said, I got this shot of you that says so much, and I don't know if the professional photographer got it, which he did not. It was called the Mazinka. The Mazinka, if those of you of Jewish faith don't know, if your last child gets married, they tease you and all your relatives walk around you and they sing the song because you're like honeymooners again, because there are no kids in the house anymore. And there I was facing him, one chair for him, one chair for me, facing each other. And my daughter-in-law happened to get a great shot of us staring at each other, and she made pictures for all of us. And that's the picture that I have in my room, and that's the picture I talk to. I don't think I wear my heart on my sleeve. I think that I am one to have a smile on my face easily.
Absolutely.
My kids tease me, and
All
they
the
say
time.
you make excuses for everyone. You never find fault with anyone. And I say, sometimes people are unhappy. Sometimes they've got problems. And if you could make them feel better, don't find the bad, find the good. And my son-in-law, Lee, if he's listening to this, some years ago at Passover, said he gave me a new name, Will Rogers. I said, why? He said, because you never met a person you didn't like. And I said, I didn't like Hitler, and that's a standing gag with us. So that's about it. If I knew that I was going to do this, I would have had one complete poem, maybe the one that I wrote to him when he passed away.
I see.
And,
I'd like to end with, obviously, where we're all getting older and getting on in years. How would you like to be remembered? What would be the thing that you'd want to share with relatives you haven't even met yet? Descendants. What would you like them to know?
I think I would like to be remembered for just what I am. Friendly, caring, loving. I am not knocking material things. By golly, it's nice to have nice things, but it cannot be the most important thing in my life. Thanksgiving, we all sat around the table, and Allison, my number one granddaughter, said, let's all say what we're thankful for. And I think I basically said that. I said, I think I should go first because I'm the oldest. And my son Howard said, listen, you're the matriarch now. And I said, that's right. And I said just what I'm saying now. All of us sitting here around together and loving and caring about each other, and about caring about our friends and caring about people. I care about charities. I wish I could give more than I do. I volunteer on Mondays. I am with children. It's called the generational period. And they give up half of their lunch hour to be in this program. And I love them and they love me. And I watch them till they graduate from 6th grade. And it's something that I enjoy. I love children. I love people. And above all, I just want people to be good, and I wish that there's peace on earth and that no one has to suffer.
It sounds like Miss America representing New York.
Not only New York, the world.
I'd like to thank you for coming in today with me and schlepping in this bad weather. It's raining. We expect 2 inches of rain today.
I want to thank you for thinking about doing this, because the thought alone is precious to me.
Maybe we'll add some volumes to this. Thank you, Ma.
And about that book, I always told you, as long as I live, my baby, you will always be. You're my youngest.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. How do we do, Ma?
I don't know.
How do you like it?
Very much.
Was it good?
Oh, yeah.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I feel like I went back so many years. And I mean, I am no youngster today, and the years have been kind to me. I'm healthy. And I'm surrounded by loving family. But there's such a void. And in doing this, I felt the void strongly.
Did you remember details or things that you hadn't thought about for a while? Or no? I mean,
I think anything that I mentioned today at some time or another, I do think about. I
did
didn't mention, I even remember delivering newspapers. If the boy that had to deliver the newspapers didn't show up, I was in charge of delivering the papers to the apartment house. But
And that carried on to when it rained. She would drive me around on my paper route in the 60s,
Right.
70s.
Andrew, why do you think it was you that did the interview? Was it because you saw this project, or?
I'm the only one who could sit in a room with her for 2 hours. No. I saw I saw it. I just thought my mother, as we had mentioned, is not in need for anything with clothing or this and that.
Right.
And to get her another sweater.
She'll return it, as you said, or she'll wear it, but.
No, she'll return it.
Yeah.
So this I thought was something that
I don't need anything when it